record. So I'll do that now, and we can get started after that. Okay. Once again, thank you guys so much for coming tonight. I'm so excited to see everybody, and it looks like I'm recognizing some people from game night too. So that's super awesome. I hope that everybody who came to game night had a really fun time. We're planning another one because it was such a hit. So hopefully if you couldn't make it, you can make it to the next one. And so on that note, I'm going to quickly just share my screen with you guys. And okay, so tonight we have our genetic counselor night. We have Erin down here with us, and she's going to give us a quick presentation. And then after that, I have a lot of events to go over with you guys. So if you can stick around for just a little bit after that, I would be very grateful, and we can talk about that. And now, everybody, please welcome Erin.
I'm on mute. Hey, I will go ahead and share my screen. All right, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about research and counseling and kind of how I got here. And definitely feel free to interrupt me and ask questions at any time. And then, or if you want to ask questions in the chat, you're more than welcome. I will try to get out of full screen so that I can see. All right. I don't know if I'll be able to see the chat, but if you could just let me know if you guys have any questions as I go on. So I work at the Institute for Genomic Medicine at Nationwide Children's, and then I'm also on the faculty at Ohio State with the genetic counseling training program. I had kind of an interesting journey to genetic counseling. So when I started at Ohio State as a freshman in undergrad, I didn't know about genetic counseling. I didn't know that it was a possibility for me. And so I was a major in animal science, and I had a genetics minor. And then a little bit into my sophomore year, I think, I decided that pre-vet was not for me, and I found out about genetic counseling. At that point, I kind of tried to decide whether to switch completely to molecular genetics as a major or just keep it as a minor. And I decided to continue with the animal sciences major. If you want to know anything about cattle or swine, I probably know too much. And then after that, I started working in a lab on campus in the basement of the vet school, but it was actually a molecular genetics lab. They worked with retroviruses. Unfortunately, she's not there anymore. She moved to another institution, but I gained a lot of great experience from that laboratory. Worked there for a couple of years, and at the same time, I was also interning with Rob Polarski, who is a genetic counselor with Ohio State. He is a cancer genetic counselor. I don't know how many of you guys have met him, but he just recently announced that he's retiring. So that's some sad news, but I worked on one of his cancer projects, volunteering and updating a lot of the info there. And at the same time, was able to be introduced to a lot of the genetic counseling community at Ohio State. At that point, they had not developed the genetic counseling training program yet, but it was in development, and I was able to meet with Dawn Elaine, the now program director. At that time, she was not, but she let me know that they would be developing a program at Ohio State, and was able to find out a little bit more about genetic counseling through her. And I had really only been introduced to genetic counseling on the cancer side of things. So I didn't realize how many different specialties there are in genetic counseling at that point. And my horizons broadened a lot. I think just in a 6-month period, I was able to shadow or interview a lot of genetic counselors throughout Columbus and then some throughout Ohio. And I would really recommend, I know with so many training programs here in the state, it is hard to get in for shadowing. But I really would recommend if you can get an interview with one. That provided me with a lot of insight into different specialties and kind of what they do. So I was able to interview with Matt Pastore, who is the lead clinical general genetic counselor here at NCH, when I was in undergrad, and kind of found out more about the pediatric side of things, and then was able to shadow with some prenatal genetic counselors. And at that point, I found out about the Ohio Department of Health Newborn Screening Lab. They were experiencing budget cuts, and so they unfortunately couldn't keep some of their staff on and really needed interns to help out in their lab. And so I had just finished up at the Borsler lab, and I was able to intern at the ODH in their newborn screening lab under Rosemary Hage, and found out all about blood spots, and got to call different hospitals throughout Ohio and information from them. That was a great experience to find out a little bit more about the process that patients can go through to get to genetic counseling, and different screening techniques that they do. It definitely, that experience has helped me a lot on the pediatric side of things, because now I can kind of know what the different sticking points getting to a newborn screen are like. And so, especially during my time in clinical genetics, I was able to kind of use that to my advantage and know what might have happened to a sample. At that point, I actually graduated and applied, and I didn't get in the first time. So with my animal science major and molecular genetics minor, it just wasn't enough to really compete with the rest of the applicants. And so I talked to Dawn and asked what I could do to strengthen my resume, what better experiences I could gain. And she recommended turning my molecular genetics minor into another degree. And then also recommended the suicide prevention services as an advocacy experience. So I applied for both of those, and I was able to get in with suicide prevention services and was able to turn my molecular genetics minor into a major. And I applied again the next year, and I was able to get in. I will say that something that I was kind of hesitant about going in, but from learning more, the personal statement is so important, a lot more important than I thought it was going to be. And so I would really recommend sharing any sort of personal experiences that you have in your personal statement. If you argue,
Erin, you glitched out for a second. When you come back, I'll let you know. Brief break, everybody. Let's see if I can message her. Sorry guys, just a second. How's everybody enjoying it so far? Already very informative. I'm really grateful that she could make it tonight. Okay, we'll just take a brief break until she comes back. I'll try and message her, but everybody just hang out for a second. Thank you for your patience. I'm very appreciative. Hi. Welcome back.
I think I must have overwhelmed my Mac.
Okay, I think, there you go. I gave you your permissions.
Okay, awesome. All right. Oh, looks like everything shut down. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, the Macs really just aren't built to handle much, are they?
No, unfortunately, it completely shut down.
Oh.
The poor thing. All right, there we go. All right. So as I was saying, I would just say that if you are writing a personal statement for any reason, making it truly personal is the best thing that you can do. So something that I didn't realize, I kind of still held it at more of a professional level. So I didn't share a lot of the personal details about my life within my personal statement, but my personal experiences really played into going into genetic counseling. And I think addressing that in any program that you are going into is really the best path. So I won't go too much further into that, but so I eventually ended up going to Emory University, which is down in Atlanta, and they had a genetic counseling program that had just started the year prior to Ohio State, so it was only a year older, so still a very new program. They're still in development, just like Ohio State is, and they are known to be more research heavy. So each genetic counseling training program has a capstone project or a thesis project, and Emory calls theirs the focus internship. So it is an internship that you're expected to keep throughout your time there, and mine was in skeletal dysplasias. Really, the only thing I'll touch on with that is just how ingrained research was into every semester that we had. and that helped push me to my specialty. And then also we had lots of specialty rotations at Emory, cardiology, autism clinic, and then we also had neurology, lab, and many others, but one that really stuck with me was my neurology rotation, and I was able to be independent for some of it, so it gave me really good experience going into what I do now, which is working within our Institute for Genomic Medicine, like I talked about. So my primary appointment is within IGM, and then I also see patients in the complex epilepsy clinic part-time as well. So I'm part research, part epilepsy genetic counselor. We have a few different protocols or studies within IGM. Here are our quote unquote translational protocols. So those are the studies that bridge clinical and research, and each of them have a GC or genetic counselor as a coordinator for the study. So the oldest program, or the oldest study, is called Rare Diseases, and that involves patients getting whole genome sequencing. It's been around since I think 2015 or 2016. They started out with whole exome sequencing, which is just really large genetic tests. And then once that came on the clinical market, they switched to whole genome sequencing. The next protocol that came into IGM is our cancer protocol. And then one of my protocols, one of my studies, is kind of like the little brother to the cancer protocol. It's the epilepsy study. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we just started up this year a rapid whole genome study for children in the ICU. And I'm also the study coordinator for that. And then still in development is the behavioral health genomics study, doing whole genomes on children in the behavioral health clinics at NCH. So for our epilepsy study at IGM, I kind of get to play both roles. So it's nice. Any of our patients that have refractory epilepsy, so refractory epilepsy is when a child has 2 or more seizures and they have failed 2 or more medications to control those seizures. So usually these kids are coming back multiple times to see us, and they really do have uncontrolled seizures that are causing them a lot of problems. So they are seen in our complex epilepsy clinic, which is on Thursdays, and they're seen by a lot of different specialties. So genetics just being one of them, social work, neuropsychology. We have an alliance person there. And in that clinic, we will do clinical genetic testing, so not on the research side. And then they also have different screenings that they do, like EEGs, to evaluate them for their seizures. Once they are part of that clinic, we are hoping to help get them under control in some way there. But if we can't, then they usually undergo something called phase 1 monitoring, and that is just more screening for them. So they are admitted to the hospital, and they undergo MRI, EEG, and PET scan to better understand their seizures, where they're coming from in the brain, how much of the brain they're affecting. And then after that monitoring, a group of people meets every other week to discuss the results of those screenings. And they kind of discuss what surgery might be best, or if surgery might be best for the patient. So they really only are doing surgery on patients that can't be controlled by medication, and it's more of a last resort because brain surgery comes with a lot of potential consequences. And so the first surgery that they usually undergo is some sort of grid monitoring to do screening for the seizures on the brain itself. And then depending on how that goes, they may have brain tissue resection. So that epilepsy focus is hopefully removed during surgery. And that's where our study comes in. So patients are already having brain surgery. They're already having tissue removed to hopefully stop their seizures. And that extra tissue is just sent to our pathology department, and it's kept for about 5 years before it's destroyed. So we saw the opportunity to hopefully learn a little bit more about their epilepsy tissue. And our patients that join the study have blood drawn, and then we get that tissue from pathology and do genetic testing on both the blood and the brain tissue to see if there are any genetic causes that we can find for their epilepsy. And so far, we have a fairly good hit rate. We find answers for about a third of our patients, and as far as genetic testing goes, that's pretty good. So we are, like I said, looking for any we can find the specific brain tissues that are removed during surgery that aren't in the blood for the most part. We do whole exome sequencer and genetic testing on their blood as well to see if there's anything that they might have that wasn't found clinically, or if they didn't have clinical testing. And then our hope, like I said, is to find one of those genetic changes. And if we do, then have a targeted therapy or a targeted medicine for them to treat their seizures. So if their seizures come back after surgery, which is fairly rare, then hopefully we can treat them and not trialing more and more medicines like we did before surgery. So this is just some of the results from one of our patients. He ended up having several different pieces of tissue removed, and we did find an answer for him. So he didn't have any genetic changes in his blood, but he did have a genetic change at differing levels in his brain tissue. And so we ended up finding an answer for him. And then the other study that I coordinate within IGM is the rapid whole genome sequencing study. It's a little bit different in that it has a very finite time that we are going to be doing the study because it's going to be transitioning to a clinical test. So currently, when a child is admitted to the hospital and the inpatient team thinks that they might have something genetic, they consult genetics, and the clinical genetics doctors come see them. They decide what testing is best for them, and some of the time that testing is a rapid or critical whole exome sequencing. So whole exome sequencing, like I kind of talked about with the epilepsy study, is the biggest genetic test that we can do clinically. And it's just reading through all of the patient's genes, their exons, which is the protein encoding portion of their genes, to see if there are any misspellings that might be causing their symptoms. So usually when a doctor is ordering a stat WES or stat whole exome on a patient, that means that they're pretty critically ill, and they want to find an answer for their symptoms as soon as possible to treat them in the best way that they can. These are usually babies that are very sick, and they might want to decide whether to palliate care, so to remove interventions or to change interventions. So with this, they're currently sending this clinical test out to Baylor Genomics, which is in Texas. And we would hopefully like to replace that send out test with a test of our own here at NCH. And doing a bigger test, so whole genome sequencing, which is checking just all of the DNA for misspellings, and doing it more quickly than the Baylor test. So right now the Baylor test comes back in about 2 weeks, which doesn't seem like very long, but it's a long time when you have a really sick kid. And then we're hoping to get our turnaround time down to 48 hours. So right now we are enrolling patients and we're on our 15th patient, and we have been able to find some answers for our patients so far. I would say that most of the time we are so as part of the criteria, they have to be getting the Baylor test at the same time that they're getting our test, and they have to have the patient, mom, and dad enrolled, and that just helps us sift through all of the genetic changes that we're going to find when we do such a large genetic test. So oddly, when we're doing this type of testing, on the back end of the sequencing side of things, it actually takes less time to do a whole genome than a whole exome, and it doesn't logically make any sense, but I'm not going to go into the details of why. But on the analysis pipeline, which is the part that I'm most involved with, it definitely takes more time. So we're still adjusting to that. So we're still getting closer to that 2-day turnaround time. I think some of our patients are around 4 days. So we're working on it. I think the go live date at this point is probably going to be somewhere around mid to end 2021 for a whole genome sequencing clinically. All right, and then I just want to talk a little bit about my involvement with the OSU training program. The rotations that we have here at NCH are the General Genetics Clinic rotation, which is the one that started first. So that is just rotating with our general genetic counselors who see patients with the geneticists. And that I think they have both first and second year students through that rotation. And then in the summer, I believe that they are there full time for that one. I'm not involved so much with that rotation. The specialty clinic rotation I am involved with as part of the epilepsy clinic. So we get second years as part of the specialty clinic rotation, and they will rotate with us in the epilepsy clinic. I think there's bone clinic, Prader-Willi, Angelman, Milo clinic, and then we are adding on cardio and neuromuscular at this point, but those just passed their board, so it's going to be a little bit. And then the cancer clinic, I also don't have much involvement with, but I think that they take first and second years. And then within IGM, we have our lab research rotation. So you would rotate with me on the research side, and then with our lab genetic counselors on the clinical lab side. And those are also just second years. And then as part of an observation during your first year, you can rotate with our behavioral health and neuromuscular genetic counselors. So I think those are like a few day observations in your first year. So that is all I had. What questions do you guys have about genetic counseling?
Anybody feel free to unmute your mic just so you know. Or if you want to type something in, we can also read that out too.
Is it a thing for like undergrads, the shadow genetic counselors? I know like in like when physicians and stuff, it's really common, but what about genetics?
So I think it used to be more common. It's a little more difficult now because there are 3 genetic counseling training programs in Ohio. And so many of the GCs that are around are usually busy with a genetic counseling student. So it's harder to have a shadower along with you just because there can only be so many people in a room at one time. But I know when I first started as a genetic counselor at NCH, we used to take shadowers when we weren't eligible to have a genetic counseling student. And those GCs that aren't eligible are just those who haven't passed their boards yet. So as genetic counselors, we have to pass boards, I think within 3 years after we graduate from our program. And so if they haven't, then they are open to take shadowers, but just not genetic counseling students. So you can look for some of those on the NSGC website, and they might be able to take shadowers.
Thanks.
I was curious about what your personal interaction looks like with patients. How much interaction are you having with patients? Is that daily or?
Yep. So on the clinical side of things, I only see patients in clinic on Thursdays and Fridays, but I will see them all day normally pre-COVID. And it's usually part of their larger appointment, but we can also have just genetic counseling only appointments where we're getting pedigrees and then discussing genetic testing and what their different options are. And then unfortunately, just part of the job, we also go over insurance a lot too.
So does that mean that you're working alongside, like you mentioned, the genetic doctors? Do you have a lot of physicians that you commonly work with then?
So I personally don't work with any geneticists. I have one that I can consult in case I have any problems with anything. But normally I'm working with epileptologists. So they see patients in the epilepsy clinic and then either refer patients to me for genetic counseling, or I will go ahead and see them just the day of clinic. That's kind of how our multidisciplinary clinics work. We just have a patient in a room and we just jump in and out, lots of providers in one day. So those appointments can be really long, but you can see lots of people at one time.
Thank you.
One question that I kind of had that was not really about genetic counseling, but why 5 years? Why was that the demarcation for the IgM epilepsy study? Is there a specific reason? Like, does the tissue go bad after 5 years, or?
I think it is just the amount of tissue that they store. After it hits the 5-year mark, they're like, no, we're getting full. We can't keep more than 5 years worth of tissue. I would assume, meeting the pathologist, that if they got more storage, then they would definitely keep that tissue longer. They don't want to let go of it.
All right, Lauren, I think I cut you off, so go ahead.
Yeah, you're good. I was just gonna ask, so when you were applying to the genetic counselors program, you said that you did suicide prevention counseling. Was that recommended, or what would you kind of further elaborate on that for?
Yeah. So Dawn is the program director, and she said that in looking at my resume, I didn't have any advocacy experiences, and I needed one to get in. So I asked her what she recommended, and she knew about suicide prevention services. I would really recommend them. They're great and do a lot of upfront training before you work the hotlines. And then it's not a huge time commitment once you're on the hotline. So that's really nice. I think it's 3 hours a week maybe. And then you pick your time and then you just work with them. But part of the reason I picked that one, I think she recommended a couple of different hotlines, but I don't remember what they were now. Part of the reason I picked that one was just the training that you got beforehand, because I didn't really want to be thrown on a hotline without
yeah.
knowing what I was doing.
That's understandable.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
And I had a question. So I was wondering that if there's a cancer genetic counselor, suppose, and there's a pediatric genetic counselor, like how would their roles differ, and why would one want to choose cancer genetics over pediatric genetics? Like, yeah.
Yeah. So within the pediatric field, there's also cancer genetic counseling. So pediatric cancer genetic counselors, I would say, kind of bridge both of the gaps. But if we're just talking about specialties separately, adult cancer genetics is quite a bit different from pediatric genetics in that cancer genetic counselors usually work a little bit more like me, where I don't work closely with a geneticist or a doctor necessarily. I have my own appointments, and cancer genetic counselors have their own appointments where they see patients and will order testing for those patients. And then they're also seeing the same type of condition over and over. So they're seeing cancer over and over, and I'm seeing epilepsy over and over. On the pediatric side of things, you're working alongside a geneticist. So usually the patient has an appointment with a geneticist, and then they also see a genetic counselor at the same time. And then on the pediatric side, I think they can see almost any condition. So there's really no predicting what's going to walk in. They don't see the same conditions over and over, and there's a huge variety on the pediatric side.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Would you say then that either your experience or what you've heard from other genetic counselors, is that pretty integrated with working with children or family planning?
Yeah. So we will talk a lot about, once we get a result back and we know what's going on in the family, we will talk about the mode of inheritance. And then there's just a lot of reading what the family would want. So sometimes families don't want to hear about their recurrence risk, and they don't want to hear about possible family planning options for themselves. So they might just be done having kids, or it's not something that they're interested in hearing, and we're completely fine with that. But if they are interested in learning more, then we'll let them know what their risks are for having another child with that condition, and then also how they might go about having a child without that condition. So usually that goes with IVF, PGD, those sorts of options. And then we might also, so I've referred some of them to prenatal genetic counselors so that they can talk about them on that portion.
Thank you. If anybody else have any questions, feel free to speak up.
You said that Emory's genetic counseling program was like really, really research heavy. Would you say Ohio State's is closer to that, or like less so?
I would say it's less research heavy. Just my experience from being a supervisor, I think it's more cancer heavy. So we didn't have nearly as much cancer at Emory, but it seems like most of the Ohio State students come out with a lot of cancer knowledge.
Thank you.
I will say every program is required to fulfill all of the checked boxes. So all of them are fairly well-rounded. They have their favorites. So.
I was gonna say, is there a way, like, because it's not necessarily something they advertise on all like the genetic counseling websites, like, oh, we're more research heavy or we're more cancer heavy. Like, where is that something you would find out about each program? Like, just emailing people, or?
I would say Oh, it's hard. They're probably not going to admit it if you email them. If so, when they go to talk about their thesis projects, you can kind of tell whether they are a little bit more research heavy or not. And then as far as specialty wise, if you hear them, you can ask about their rotations. And so if they have a lot of different like cancer rotations or prenatal rotations, then you might get the sense that they might lean a little bit more toward one area or another. But yeah, we definitely that question a lot during the program. I would say that our program director almost never answered that directly. So I don't know that they'll clue you in on it, but you can kind of read them to tell.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. So what do you suggest for some of us who are really interested in doing research but couldn't because of COVID, and we couldn't do like in-person labs?
So I think, well, actually, I don't know. When I was, I don't want to assume anything about what the molecular genetics major has at Ohio State now, but when I was there a few years ago, they had a lab course that was required, or you had to work in a lab to get out of it. And I would recommend taking that as early as you can. I know that there are some courses that you have to have before you take that. But just talking to those course directors, we were able to know about job postings that were out. My lab job actually came from another one of the MolGen courses that I was a part of. They just, I met with her separately to talk about genetic counseling because I'd never heard of it before. And she said, well, you might want to try like working in a lab first and seeing what you like. And she let me know about different opportunities. So I would, I wouldn't say bug, but I would become friends with as many of your professors as you can on the molecular genetics side, because they're going to be the ones to hear about jobs first, or even if there's not technically a job posted, they might know about somebody who could use some help. So even if you're not going to get paid for it, it's still a great experience.
I'd like to chime in briefly there. That will be a great question for our next meeting when Dr. Hopper is here. She is like our department's savant when it comes to all of those things. So sit on that one, get her opinion on it too, because she'll have a better answer than I think any of us will have, because I'm sure she's already been asked it 10 or 15 times this semester.
Okay.
You may or may not have been the one that got me my job. So.
I actually had a similar question. Like you mentioned about shadowing earlier. So right now with the pandemic, we can't really shadow, and there are people who are graduating. So what would you suggest with that? How to go about it right now?
I would, so on the NSGC or National Society of Genetic Counselors website, you can search genetic counselors that are welcoming students. And so you can email them, and I would recommend asking if you can interview with them first, or if you can just talk to them over coffee. And I think that is kind of a good in. And then sometimes they might have some free time on a certain day that you could shadow, or they might just be able to go over interesting cases that they've had with you if they can't have you shadow. So I know that as far as the training programs go, they don't necessarily look upon shadowing as greater than just talking with a genetic counselor, because they know how difficult it can be to get in shadowing.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any finishing up questions for Erin before we move on? Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Erin. That was extremely informative, and I'm really, really grateful that you could make it tonight because a lot of us in the club are really interested in genetic counseling, and it's just awesome to get our questions answered right now, especially as everybody has been mentioning with COVID. It's so hard to, talk to people right now. So thank you so much. We're really grateful.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and you're free to go. We're just going to talk about some club stuff. So thank you so much.
All right. See you guys.
Bye, Erin. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to keep you guys for just one more second. That's okay. And she was great. I'm very, very glad that she got the chance to talk with us. I hope everybody learned something. So when it comes to upcoming events, there is some stuff that I did want to share quickly in regard to career fairs. I'm going to put these in the chat in the group me, so don't worry about like writing down this information. I mean, obviously you can if you want, but I will also put it in the chat. So on October 15th, there is going to be a genetic counseling career fair. So if you were interested in anything that Erin was just talking about, or even if it's just something that you want to recommend to somebody or that's kind of been on your mind and you want to learn a little bit more about it, highly recommend checking out this career fair. It's going to be on October 15th. I'll have more details in the chat that I sent out in the group me. And then Mitchell is going to talk to you guys also in the chat about the Graduate and Professional School Expo. I'm sure that some of you have heard it from other professors. It's pretty widespread. Now, this doesn't just hone in on genetic counseling, just so you know. But that expo is coming up next Wednesday. And like I said, Mitchell will have more information for you in regard to that. Does anybody have any questions about the career fairs before I move on? You can chat or unmute yourself. I'll check the chat quickly. Actually, somebody let me know if the chat pops up because I can't see it. Okay, so I'll move on for now. Our next meeting, September 30th, like we've been talking about consistently, we're going to have Dr. Hopper come in and talk to us about research and scholarships. Great opportunity, especially during COVID right now when we're all like, what do we do? I think this is going to be a great opportunity for everybody. I really, really hope that you guys can make it out to this meeting because it's going to be super important in regard to learning about research, to learning about what kind of scholarships that you can get involved in while everything is weird, and how things are changing in our new world of research. Oh my goodness. Okay, also, game night 2. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we had a lot of fun at game night, so we're gonna do it again. If you guys have any suggestions of like a game that wasn't there that you wanna see, hit us up, talk to me on GroupMe. You can private message us if you want, you can email us, anything. Or you can just chime in now, put it in the chat, whatever you want. We don't have any details on this right now just because we're in the mode of planning it, but we will have another one. It's very fun. I hope that you guys can make it. And just a quick reminder that we have our study session, not for a little bit, before finals up in November 4th. And this is just going to be another way that we can all kind of get to know each other and do some studying. Also, I did want to mention, I saw that some people were starting to make some group meets for different classes. I love that. If you guys are in a class and you're like, I don't have anybody to talk about the homework studying with, I am sure that somebody else in our group me in the club will probably either be in that class or have taken that class. Feel free to reach out, say, can we start a new group me? Talk about it in the group me there. Super flexible. Love it. Love studying. We love class. And then lastly, our important links, as you always know, the top line is our group me if for some reason you're not in it, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Kate does an awesome job of keeping those up. She's super creative and fun, and we love to have you guys support us on every media possible. And with that being said, do we have any questions or comments?
That was a strong finish. That was you really strong finish.
Thank you, Mitchell. I always just swing into the end there. Okay, well, on that note, everybody, thank you so much for coming out. Like I said, we'll send out more information regarding those career fairs and game night. And I will see you in 2 weeks for our next meeting. Thank you, guys.